Hi folks. I've had Galaxy's Edge on the brain the last little while. I had a few things I wanted to talk about. Now most people, they have a thought about something, let's say it's Galaxy's Edge, they just think about it, they move on with their day. Me, I figured I'd do a video, and since I'm talking about Disney and Star Wars, let's have a look at the Starspeeder 1000 from the Disney parks. It's 3 3/4 inch scale, which means, you know, this is where all my action figures are gonna be sitting. So a bit of a split purpose video today, half toy opening, half video essay, thoughts, I don't know. The first thing is always the same thing, which is that if this comment thread is not open to people who just want to come in and whine about what they consider to be executive leadership decisions at Disney, particularly if those leadership decisions involve a woman. There are plenty of YouTube channels for that. Unfortunately. Go there, leave here, thank you. The second thing I'll say is that I am not a Disney adult. You know, I've been to Disneyland once. It was 3 years ago as I'm recording this. It was in the summer of 2023. I went explicitly because I had wanted to see Galaxy's Edge. I was very excited about it. And I went and had a great time, but I by no means profess myself to be an expert. I also never did, you know, the big one, Galactic Star Cruiser. I never did that. I never wanted to do that. That always seemed like a bad bet to me even before they closed it. So this will not be about that. If you want to talk about that, go to the Jenny Nicholson 4-hour video. It's fantastic. If you have not seen that video, it is fantastic. And finally, again, kind of to preempt this comment thread turning into some kind of a flame war, I would like to remind you all that for all intents and purposes, I really like the sequel movies. I mean, I like the sequel duology. By which I mean that I think both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi are terrific Star Wars movies in completely different ways, obviously. And, you know, The Last Jedi will always, on a kind of a creative and personal level, will always mean more to me. But The Force Awakens is great. And we all know what happened with the third one, but this is not really about complaining about that either. There are other places to do that. Go there. Why Starspeeder? Well, a few things. When they announced the Starspeeder 3000 at D23, I think it was in 2024. It was an exclusive to that convention. I was pretty jealous. It was pretty gorgeous. And I mean, I grew up in the 1980s. Even though I never went to Star Tours as a child, I recognized kind of the gooey heart of vintage Lucasfilm greatness of that toy. Never got my hands on it. Then they released this one last summer, 2025, which is the modern version. And then I was like, that's the one. That's the one I should get if I'm gonna get any of these. And then Jason Yakface recently announced that there's not gonna be a HasLab this year. So it's gonna be years before I get anything this big ever again. So it was time to tear this off. It's the one that I experienced when I went to Galaxy's Edge 3 years ago. Star Tours, it was this Star Tours almost exactly. I understand that the video content in here contains material from 2024, or that was rolled out in 2024, I should say, which is the Ahsoka stuff and I think the Mandalorian stuff. So it's not exactly the experience that I had in 2023, but it's pretty close. Sequel trilogy era stuff, and R2 and 3PO flying the ship, and so on and so forth. It's representative of my experience, which makes it a souvenir of my experience as well. So it was on my want list for a while. It was pretty high on the list, and I kind of just never really pulled the trigger on it. And then finally I was thinking about all this, and I was kind of getting nostalgic for a certain era of Galaxy's Edge that I think is now ending, which is kind of one of the reasons I wanted to do this video. And so I was like, screw it. Pulled the trigger, bought the big box. I haven't quite worked out how I'm going to split up the toy stuff and the Disney stuff in this video. So the answer is almost certainly haphazardly. Apologies in advance. I got a pretty good deal on this thing, relatively speaking. I mean, it is still a very expensive toy if you don't physically go to the park and get it, which is also an expensive way to get it, I guess. But if you live down the street in Anaheim, I guess it's not that bad. I got a pretty good deal from a reseller in the UK. Came into at about, I think, 630 Canadian for me, all in, including shipping and duty and everything. So, you know, not great, but not bad. Woo! Look at the size of that thing, Wedge. I think the major downside of the 1000 against the 3000 is it doesn't come with a display base. The display base was really sick on the 3000. I will regret not having that, but I'll live with it because this is also an amazing, like, look at that. That's gorgeous. So I wanted to crystallize my thoughts on the, you know, I say in the title of this video that the story of Galaxy's Edge is a story of Star Wars brand failure. And to really understand that, you need to go back to, for me, the beginning of the Disney Star Wars era, which is when George Lucas announced, hey, I'm selling this shit to Disney. But as I recall, there was a lot of complaining from graybeards like myself, being like, oh, they're gonna Disneyfy Star Wars, oh no, blah, 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 blah. And that, I hold that at a bit of a personal remove for a number of reasons, not least of which is that whatever it is in your head that you think Disneyfication is, I kind of think Star Wars was that already. Like, you're being a bit precious with the thing. But the big differentiator for me is, and I entered the Disney era kind of like, I'm not sure, you know, I've had my Star Wars. I had my Star Wars when I was a kid. I had the prequel era when I was an adult. And I'm like, I think I'm good. Like when George Lucas dropped the mic in 2005 with Revenge of the Sith, I was very happy for that to be the end of sort of my 2 eras of Star Wars. I really thought it was. That's kind of what I emotionally prepared myself for. So I thought that was it. And that was fine with me. So I, you know, Disney era, I was like, I don't know if I need to see an episode 7, 8, 9. But I have to say, and this is very important, I really appreciated the direction of those initial forays by Disney into Star Wars. You know, the direction was expansive. The direction, I mean, people talk about, for example, they say, oh, The Force Awakens is just a remake of Star Wars. It kind of is in terms of plot, but the reason it does that, at least if I'm doing the generous reading, the reason it does that is it's gonna remake Star Wars, kind of set you up with a bunch of familiar beats, but it's gonna do that to launch brand new characters that an entire new generation of children are gonna grow up with them as their Star Wars people. You know, the way the generation before it was Anakin and Obi-Wan and Commander Cody and Rex and Ahsoka, and then the generation before that was mine, where it's Luke and Leia and Han, right? These movies were kind of built to be like, let's blow open the Star Wars universe, you know, touching the bases of a lot of material, but moving in a new direction with some big swings where there are new worlds, new characters, new marketing opportunities. But like that seemed to me, at least for the start of the sequel trilogy, so Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and Rogue One, for example, and even to an extent Solo, although I think for a lot of people Solo didn't really work, you see them being like, what if we showed you a new, like a familiar but new Star Wars, which is kind of always the thing that a sequel is trying to do anyway. As I mentioned in my Hot Toys video, I don't have a light box, so I'm going to be doing this awkwardly, but you know, you take the roof off and then inside the speeder, what is that? It's 25 seats. 25 seats. So yeah, that's a lot of guys. And you know, though there's also, for some reason, there's two standing pegs near the front. So that's 27 guys. And then when you count the fact that R2 and 3PO are gonna go in there, that's 29 guys. I don't recall what the droid that goes in the little cubby hole is called, but that's 30 guys. So my Starspeeder holds 30 guys. There's some guys right there. I popped out R2 first, and the first thing he did was lose his head. That's a Droid Factory R2, all right. It's not bad. I recently reflected on the fact that I have surprisingly few R2-D2s in my collection, given one, that I love him, and two, that he's R2-D2. I mean, he's like the center of the Star Wars universe. But basically, when I saw R2 with holographic Leia back in whenever that was, I think it was 99, I was like, done. Got it. Best R2 ever. Still think that. Still think that's the best R2 that's been done, but it will be nice to have a backup R2, because I think I might only have 3, including this one. He sits up there. And yeah, it's neat that they did an actual droid socket for him instead of him just being like an emplaced head or you know, a cap for a socket like they would have done in you know, the 25 years. Like that's a pretty good level of detail. So where was I? Right. So they're launching Star Wars with all of these movies, and like, let's face it, in the Disney flywheel concept, I don't understand it perfectly, but like broadly speaking, they're creating that material to get you into the parks, which gets you back to the movie theaters. Like it's all a cycle. So they have this idea of like, we're going to create, alongside these movies, we're going to make Star Wars land. We're going to put a huge section into Disneyland and Disney World that is Star Wars, and it's terrific. Like, I genuinely had the time of my freaking life when I went to Galaxy's Edge. Like, it exceeded my expectations for what that experience could be like. But what I really love about, I mean, I've always been, in my career, I've always been very impressed by and guided by Disney's sense of storytelling within their crass commercial market universe, right? Like, they really do try to create a total experience, and Galaxy's Edge was built with that in mind. It was, quote, Imagineered with that in mind. That idea that, like, we're going to build an immersive experience where you're going to feel like you're part of the Star Wars galaxy, a Star Wars galaxy that is expansive and where the story is yours to create. And that really means a lot to me. That goes right back to why I loved Star Wars to begin with. It was partly because of the content of the film Star Wars. Like, obviously, I loved that. But what I have grown to love even more about it is how much it created an imaginary universe for me that I just explored endlessly. And it was not just an exploration of the contents of that 2-hour movie. It was all of the different directions that my mind took me in that universe, right? That's what I love about Star Wars. And that is what Galaxy's Edge felt to me anyway, like it was built around. Here's the 3PO that comes with it, which sadly is one of the best 3POs we've had in decades and is a terrible 3PO. And the reason I say sadly is just like that reflects the poor state of the 3PO universe. This kind of, I don't know, iridescent plastic in lieu of, I mean, vacuum metallization, I guess, is just a thing of the past, but this iridescent plastic just doesn't do it for me. That ain't correct. So I will probably be swapping this 3PO out in my Star Cruiser. I was thinking of using, because I need one with knees, so I think I'm going to use the one from the Ewok throne. The 3PO, when I visited Star Tours, also very, bright, shiny 3PO, very 80s style 3PO. So that 3PO from Jedi will serve me well there. I'm going to do a reading. This is from Imagineering executive Chris Beatty about the original design strategy for the park. When we first sat down, we started having very long conversations on what type of place we wanted to craft and create. It quickly became evident that it couldn't be a place that we had built before or that we had seen before. And then Imagineering executive Scott Trowbridge says, we knew we had to build a place that could be not just the start of one adventure, but also the start of many adventures, a place that evokes a sense of exploration and discovery, mysteries around every corner, a place that felt like it had history, but also that every day there was going to be a new adventure. So you see why that means so much to me as regards what I was saying about Star Wars kind of being an imagination spark for me. And you really feel that in the park when you visit. The scent, like for example, here's a quote about the placement of the Millennium Falcon. You have to wind around things. Nothing reveals itself to you right away. You don't necessarily know what's around the next corner. There aren't giant signs that say Millennium Falcon ride this way. It is intended to be a place that is explored. So that's built into the design of the park in a way that is very apparent and I think very beguiling. I'm going to end with a quote from Eric Tiemans, one of the designers. He says something that I think is very telling, especially now. Of course, we want to hit the familiar notes and make it relatable, but we also wanted to make this new land a place that has a sense of mystery that is worth exploring and is desirable to be explored. That's about not just doing the Star Wars hits. It is hilarious that I'm doing all this talk in a video about this particular product, given that this is basically the fundaments of a nostalgia play, right? The original trilogy ended, George Lucas did a Disney ride to kind of see what he could do in that space. I never went to that ride, and yet it kind of owned such a large piece of my imagination as a child that when I did finally get the chance to ride it as an adult, I immediately connected with it, and then as soon as there was a toy of it, I was like, let's go. There's the camera droid, which I will be recording all of my videos on in the future. I don't know if he has a stand. He looks like he should have a stand. The peg is for his droid slot. So maybe he doesn't have a stand. Too bad. Maybe I can adapt Palpatine's old cam droid stand. And finally, man, it would be great to be able to do this without breaking it. Oh, that was close. C-3PO's chair. Not a great 3PO, not a great chair, but he does have that kind of, oh shit, grip on the one side, so that's good. In the interior, that's where 3PO's chair goes. And as a different YouTuber pointed out in his video about this, that panel there, it opens because That is the display where ride staff makes sure you're all wearing your seatbelts. And as I think everybody knows, yes, it has seatbelts, just in case stuff gets too funky for your action figures. So my point is, Galaxy's Edge felt like it didn't need to be tied to the original trilogy so rigidly, because the entire project of that era of Disney, which I guess at this point we could call the Kathy Kennedy era, right? Like her stewardship of the company was, yeah, it's Star Wars, but we're going to build out what Star Wars is. We're going to do new stuff to engage new viewers, to build a new audience for Star Wars. We're going to keep Star Wars current. And then something happened. Now, people disagree on what the something was. I don't personally think Dave Filoni's, obsessive retrenchment of the story in the middle, in the New Republic era, like between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy, has helped, right? That seems to me to be very good for people who really liked the expanded universe books in the 90s, but doesn't do a lot for people who want the Star Wars story to have a future, to go, again, in a direction where you don't know the outcome. Obviously, the disaster of The Rise of Skywalker left a huge stink on the sequel trilogy that didn't help either, which makes it, to me, even more incredible that they spent God knows how much money to build physical brick and mortar sequel trilogy era architecture at two of the Disney parks. The thing about the Force Awakens as a project and as reigniting Star Wars as a project is you can only light that candle once, right? You've only got one try to do the next adventure of Han Solo. Like, after that, you're done. And obviously Carrie Fisher has passed, and Mark Hamill is still out there and will probably be up for anything that people want him to do, including weird digital de-aging. But you can really only harvest the nostalgia one time and use it as the energy to launch Star Wars in a new direction. After that, you have to make do with the outcomes of those decisions. And instead of doing that, instead of building on what they decided was the best way forward for the story, they've chickened out and gone backwards. Uh-oh. Just about had 17 heart attacks because it sure looked like the electronics didn't work on this ship, but... Uh-oh. They're going on a ride. Well, that's pretty great. Back to how good Galaxy's Edge is. The design of the two rides are just exceptional, and just, again, makes me astonished that they sunk this much money into sequel trilogy material and then are trying to walk it back by having... I really feel bad for the Disney cast members that have to walk the park as Luke, Leia, and Han. The young lady that I had as Rey when I was there was actually pretty good. Not because she was like a visual dead match for Daisy Ridley, but just because I guess like with Rey, she's basically a Disney princess. Like, it kind of works, but boy, that kid they got for Han, I feel terrible for her. You think Alden had it bad? Whew! But yeah, Rise of the Resistance and Smuggler's Run are both fantastic, and call me a pedant, but I'm like, I don't even understand the story Galaxy's Edge is trying to tell anymore. Like, what's physically happening in a version of that planet that is during maybe it's supposed to be immediately after the war, but Kylo Ren is trying to kill you on Rise of the Resistance. You got to imagine it's a matter of time now before they just decide that Batuu, the planet it all takes place on, is itself a mistake, and they repaint it to be Tatooine or Naboo or something, something familiar from one of the earlier movies, because I think the fundamental premise of let's do something that sparks imagination and, makes Star Wars feel like a bigger galaxy is just not the direction for the Star Wars brand, at least right now. I suppose we'll see if anything changes after they release the Ryan Gosling movie, but things are looking dire in terms of this exciting, expansive new era of Star Wars going in a million new directions. And it ceases to be a story-driven environment. It's become a convention floor. It's become like, hey kid, you want to go to Comic-Con, except it's outside? It's that. And I can't help but think that this is like Disney's default position on Star Wars as a whole now. What fans feared back in 2012 when Disney bought the company, that's finally happened. It just took 15 years longer than anyone expected. The Disneyfication of Star Wars. It's just a product on the shelf of the Disney store now, instead of a story unto itself. Meantime, though, this thing is sick. Get yourself one of these before we all fall out of the sky.